So guys, Handy Therapist here. So I'm going to show you guys how to put in this luxury vinyl flooring. So I'm actually, shameless plug here, I'm working on my new clinic. So Revival Performance Physical Therapy. So working on it, been building it out for about a month now, and should open next week. So show you a few things on how to put this stuff in. So first part, the prep work, that takes forever. Sometimes depending on how bad the flooring is. So the first part is you gotta prep the floor. So it needs to be very, very clean and kind of vacuum it really well. So we use like a scraper here to get it real nice and smooth there, getting rid of like all the extra drywall or compound that fell on the ground, any paint that kind of like made a little dip or made like a little hump. And then you can kind of see what we did here is the nail holes from the old carpet left like a big dip. And so you want to, as much as you can, I mean, it can, the stuff can tolerate a little bit. It says up to 1/8 of an inch. It can tolerate up to 1/8 of an inch of like unevenness, but you still want to kind of make it as smooth as you can so you don't hear that like hollow sound whenever you're stepping on it. So we got some Thinset, which is the same stuff that you use to put down tile, or mortar, is what it's called sometimes, and just kind of filled in the gaps just with a trowel to kind of get that a little smoother. If there's any spots in the ground that are really uneven, you can get a big long level or a 2x4 to kind of see how level it is, see if it rocks a lot, and you can get some leveling compound, which is kind of like just a really thin type of concrete that you lay that out and kind of level that out to make it nice and smooth. So we didn't have to do too much of that. We just kind of had to fill in some of the holes with the Thinset, which should be good enough. And then we went ahead and laid our flooring. So after you have scraped the floor really, really good, then you gotta figure out how you're gonna lay it out. So after you've laid out which direction you're gonna put it in, you wanna kind of measure out the room. So you don't necessarily want a tiny, tiny little sliver of a plank on the one side. So you wanna kind of measure out the whole length of the room and then decide where you wanna end or where you want to start. You always want to start on the back left corner, but you kind of want to see how much of a plank you want to start with. With this, you want to leave about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch on the sides. So from the sides of each wall. So here we're going to end up putting baseboards down. So ideally you take your baseboards out before you do this project. A lot of times if you're doing a home remodel, you don't necessarily take your baseboards out. You just put it close to it and then you put a 1/4 round on there, which is just like, well, 1/4 of a round piece. You see that in a lot of houses. And that just covers up that edge, that open edge. And so you want to have, so this is a floating floor. So it's not glued down at all. So you can see how it kind of moves. So this is a floating floor. So you want it to be able to move a tiny bit, kind of like an expansion joint, just a little bit. So that if there's a little bit of movement, it doesn't butt up against something like the wall or a stud and then have to buckle in the middle, so it doesn't compress and then buckle. So there's not going to be much. This is PVC, it doesn't expand very much at all. So putting this stuff in, so like I said, you want to start in the back left corner. That's ideal. It's not necessarily a must, but that's ideal. So with this stuff, it kind of snaps into place. So it's got these little ridges here. You can kind of see there. And it locks in to the other side. So one side has these little ridges going up and the other side has them coming down. So when we put these in, you want to overlap. You don't want it to be straight up like this. So that, if you did a whole bunch of those like this, then it would end up coming apart there. So that wouldn't be good. So you want to end up thinking about how you're going to overlap it. So like that. So I did end up doing I do a whole row. I'd end up cutting a smaller row so that I can have it overlap like this. So then you can kind of see how it's like a little bow, like a seesaw there. So that means it's not in all the way. So there, I pushed it in all the way and then it lays flat. So then there's a lip there that you want to use a hammer and a scrap piece. So you don't want to just use the hammer. So if I were to just do this, it might end up breaking off a little bit of this part and then it would come apart a little bit like down the road. It might look okay for a little while, but it wouldn't long term. So you want that, so I look real close. It's almost like it's gonna overlap. So this is almost going over top of this one where it's right on the edge there. So it's getting really, really close. So there is a tiny bit of a gap there. So that probably will be okay, but you wanna put that in there and then push it up towards this side as much as you can. So if it were to be like that, see how there's a little bit more of a gap there? If I'm gonna try to put that in and I try to hammer that in, because of the way this lip is and this lip is, it's gonna end up cracking this side and it's not gonna end up working. So we make sure you kind of put it in about 45-degree angle on the long side and then scoot it over to butt up into the next side here and then put it down. So since it's still up a little bit, then it must not be all the way down. So there, and then with this side, so it's nice and flush there, then I'll put that over and then flatten that down. And then with that, you use your, I guess they call this a tap board, or I forgot what they call it, but you buy it in a kit, it's like 20 bucks. It's got little lips on it, so where you can hammer it in like that, because if you hammer with this, with an actual hammer, it's gonna break these little tabs. So you want as much surface area as possible before you hammer that. So even, I've done it before where you get in a hurry and you're kind of moving it, and then it ends up like that before you hammer, and that'll break that there. And then there'll be a little bit of a chip there, and then when you try to go put the next one in, that little chip won't let everything go flush, and you'll be like, what the heck's going on? Why won't it go flush? So make sure you got it nice and flat before you do little bitty taps. So don't hit it too hard either. These are pretty delicate, especially if you got one of the cheaper tiles, which most of us probably will from Home Depot, Lowe's. Not that they're super cheap, but unless you get some like real commercial grade stuff, this stuff's not super, it's a little bit delicate. So then there's a tiny bit of a gap there, so I'll just barely make a little tap here. Again, if you go too hard on that, you'll end up breaking this lip. So you don't want to break that lip or else everything will go get thrown off and then you won't be able to use that tile again. So still a little bit of a gap there. So nice and flush. So we kind of go over that. Again, like I said, they always go in the same direction. So this lip, kind of put it up. You see, put it in the long side first. And then you slide it over. Make sure there's no little pieces broken in there. Slide it over as far as you can that way. So, usually goes a little easier than this actually. I guess because I'm on camera. So there. You see there's a little lip, and then this is kind of not sitting down all the way yet. So when I slam it in, it sits nice and flush with the ground. You see how it kind of set there. And that's just barely over. So we'll get this. So you don't want to start here in the middle. You want to kind of start just like you would anywhere in the corner, and then get it going in the corner, and then kind of go. Don't go too aggressive, and then make sure it's not like up off the ground like that, so you have a solid base underneath, so that if it's not exactly right in the right part of the groove on the underside, so if it's not on the right part there, then it doesn't. If it's not up, and then it breaks off. So if it's got a solid back against the ground, then it's less likely to break this part. So just use a scrap piece, hammer that in, it's nice and smooth, and then I come over to the side and then just do a little bit of a tap. So it usually just needs a little bit more of a tap to kind of flush, make those flush against each other. So there's that one, and then you just keep going. So I'll show you another one here. Only go one way. Get that groove in there. Get the long side in first. and then slide it over to the next one, and then making sure that it's nice and smooth. So again, it's up, so it's not fully in right there. Sometimes you can push it in. So there, I pushed it in, and it's pretty flush, so it's in on the long side for the most part. I checked this, so there's a little bit of a gap there. So if I were to try to hammer that in, it's not flush on this side. So I don't want to try to hammer that. I want to try to push it a little bit closer to that side. It almost will look like it's gonna try to stay up a little bit. So there. So nice and flush here. And we'll so a tiny bit of a gap there. So that's why I always come onto the other side and then just lightly tap to fill that gap. Should at least. So when you get to the end, a little trick that makes it much easier than trying to measure with a tape measure is we know that this side is going to touch right there, right? So we flip this over. So here's the side that's going down here. That's going to go against the wall, or not right up against the wall, kind of visually estimate about 1/4 inch off the wall. And then I just grab my utility blade and then mark where I'm going to end up cutting it. So this side is going to end up against the wall. Make a little line. Make a little line there. And then this stuff's super easy to cut. So there's where I need to cut. I'll hold that pretty tight. Score it a few times with my blade. And this stuff's easy. So there I scored it on the back side. And then I just put it on my knee, pop it. You can see there, sometimes if it's going to be an exposed corner, I'll cut that with the utility blade like this. But if it's not, this leaves it a little bit, not quite as smooth of an edge, but I'll just pop it there. And I mean, you can see it pretty close. It's still a really pretty good edge. I mean, you can just see it's barely little frayed, but that's going to be covered up by the baseboard or quarter round for a lot of people. Again, same thing. Put that in, long part first. Pull it over toward the short end. Get it as flush as possible. There, it's laying down pretty good, so we know that side is in. This part's pretty flush there, so hammer that in. So on the edge here, I'm gonna be able to get this in that corner. So your kit ends up coming with this. So that's another reason you want to leave a little bit of a gap there, is so that you can have some space to put that in and then close up that seam. It's just, you know, sits in there pretty good just from the tongue and groove, or the little lips on there that kind of sit together. But then that gets it just a little bit closer. And then there's your whole row. So then that piece that you cut off, so here is the one we just cut, here's the one that we just cut off of. So with this, we cut this in to make this. This can now be the start of your next row, so that it ends up being staggered about, well, depends on where you did it, but now it's staggered about that much on the next row. And so you just keep doing that every time, and then you end up with a pattern that's not exactly uniform every time. So our next one is a little different. So we got to a area where there's a door frame here. I'm going to grab a new piece. So on this door frame, it's a little different. So it'd be a little easier. So you want to kind of think about how you're going to put this in. So in order to make sure that this is nice and straight, I think I'm going to end up notching a piece out like that. You could also decide, and this isn't necessarily wrong, to do it about halfway, so that then there's just like a little L shape here. I'm still debating it. Maybe I will do that. I think I will do that. So if I do 2 pieces here, this next piece that I want to have, I want to make sure it's covering the seam here almost fully like that. So especially when you're switching rooms of any sort, you want to, so if you want to make it almost like right in the center of the next seam, so that this board ends up being like a level in a sense, to make sure that you're not end up kind of drifting off to be kind of sideways like this or the other way. So I'm going to end up measuring that. I use a Expo marker, so it's easy to take off, but you can use anything that marks on it. So I'll end up putting about right there, about halfway into the, so there. So I measure there, and then I'll pretend that it's going to go in and measure there. So then it's just going to be squared. I'd probably often use a square if it was a little bigger than that, but since it's not too big, then I'll just use that. So you could still use an Expo knife or a utility blade to cut that. So if you were to do that, you'd have to cut out all the way through on one side, score the other side, and then snap. So if you don't cut all the way through on one side, then the other side's not going to snap. It's going to end up breaking wrong and then kind of messing it up. But fortunately, I have a jigsaw, and I used a metal attachment because it's got a lot finer teeth, and it ends up working. I've tried the wood attachment, and it breaks, and it's kind of too messy, and so it doesn't work very good on this stuff. So I use the metal attachment here on the jigsaw. Stabilize it pretty good. Try to wipe the little random shavings off out here so I don't have to vacuum them up whenever I get in here. And then same thing as all the other rows. Slide that in. Oh my gosh. You can see it's a little off. There we go. And put that. So then that's going to end up butting up right next to it, and then I'll end up putting another one to keep going that way. Long side first. About 45 degrees, slide it as close as you can to there where it's really butting up against it. And then it should try to sit in. If it doesn't sit very good, so there it's kind of up. So just barely tap that. Don't go too hard, you don't want to break these things. Now it's sitting pretty flush against the ground. It's just barely up right there. This one's perfect. It's barely up there. It's not trying to like break right there. So it's just barely up, wanting to sit in that groove. Start on the corner and then work your way this way. There you go, nice and smooth, still a tiny bit of a gap. These actually have these little grooves. Mine are just worn out, so you can use them like this. Mine have gotten worn out, so I just ended up using it at the edge there. But you still want to be really careful not to break these tongue grips. There you can see that is super smooth. And then it's butted up against there. So you don't necessarily want to butt it up against the wall, like I said earlier about the expansion boards. So your kit will end up coming with these little spacers. So this is what you want to use ideally. For aesthetics look, I'm letting it butt up against this wall, but then leaving a little bit of extra room up against the other wall so that it can still float a little bit. Per instructions, this would have a little bit more of a gap, but I'm taking a chance just because this is going to look better, and I left a little bit more room on the other side, so it's still floating. But anywhere against drywall where I know I'm going to have some baseboard covering it, then I actually am using the right amount of spacers. So it comes with two different spacers, 1/4 of an inch and then 1/2 of an inch. And that'll keep it from whenever you're knocking on one side, it's just hitting these spacers and keeping that 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch away from the wall. So pretty simple, you'll just keep doing row after row, exact same way. And this stuff is pretty awesome. It's actually completely waterproof. So, actually, which has turned out good. I put this in my house, and just last week we had a water leak, and it wasn't a major leak, but it got under the floor, and if that was laminate or wood or carpet or pretty much anything else besides this vinyl, then we would have had to replace the floor. All we had to do was put tons of fans on it, mop it up, and wait a little bit. As long as it didn't get into some insulation or some wood, then it was fine. So again, the long side first, putting it in tight, put it as close to that side as we can get. Put it down just a little bit so I can tap it. You saw how it kind of sat down, still up here, so it must not be fully in the groove right there. And when I tap it in, it sits down a little bit. Still not perfect, so just go along the whole thing. Just barely tap it. And then here is about where we want it. So it's not able to go all the way down because it's hitting the groove there that it's going to sit in once I tap it in. Nice and smooth. Tap it in. And it goes pretty fast. So the only part that takes long is the little cuts that you have to make all the time. But once you get on the big stretches, it goes real fast. That's it.